Right now, all across the United States, something is quietly lining up in the sky that most people have not noticed yet. And by the time they do notice, it may already be sitting right on top of them. I'm not talking about one storm. I'm not talking about one hot afternoon that ruins a weekend barbecue. I'm talking about a pattern, a big one. The kind that doesn't just pass through and leave, the kind that parks itself over half the country and simply refuses to move for days on end. On one side of the map, the heat is about to build into numbers that don't look real when you first read them. We're talking triple digits, not the feels-like number they put in small print at the bottom of the screen, the actual air temperature climbing higher and higher day after day in places that are already tired and dried out from a long summer. And on the other side of that very same map, something completely different is getting ready to unload. Cooler air is charging down from the north, and where it slams into all that heat, the atmosphere is going to do exactly what it always does when those two forces meet. It's going to fight, and it's going to fight violently. But here's the part that almost nobody's paying attention to. There's a third piece to this, one that doesn't make the dramatic headline, one that sneaks in quietly behind the heat and behind the storms and ends up doing some of the worst damage of all. So stick with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly what's coming, why this particular setup is different from a normal summer week, and the simple things worth doing before any of it arrives. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to take a confusing, chaotic forecast and make it a little bit clearer. So let's just walk through it together, one piece at a time. Let's start with the heat, because the heat is the engine that drives everything else in this pattern. I want you to picture the atmosphere over the middle of the country like a giant lid sitting on top of a pot. When that lid clamps down, the air trapped underneath it can't rise and escape the way it normally would. It gets stuck. And stuck air, sitting under a strong late summer sun, does one simple thing. It bakes. Every single day that lid stays in place, the temperature underneath it climbs a little higher than the day before. Day 1 feels hot, day 2 feels worse. And by day 4 or day 5, you're looking at the kind of heat that stops being merely uncomfortable and starts becoming genuinely dangerous to the human body. And I want to be careful here, because this is exactly where a lot of forecasts either exaggerate the danger or wave it off completely, and honestly, neither one of those helps you at all. So let me just be straight with you. Heat like this does not announce itself the way a tornado does. There is no siren for it. There is no wall of black cloud rolling in on the horizon to warn you. It just sits there completely invisible while the human body slowly loses its ability to cool itself down. And that is precisely what makes it the quiet killer that it is. More people in this country are harmed by extreme heat every year than by hurricanes and tornadoes combined. And it happens without a single dramatic image ever showing up on the evening news. It happens in a living room with a broken air conditioner. It happens to the elderly neighbor that nobody thought to check on. It happens on an ordinary Tuesday under a bright, hazy sun that honestly looks almost peaceful from a distance. Here's another way to think about just how serious this is. When the overnight low never really drops, when the air stays warm even at 3 o'clock in the morning, your body never gets its chance to recover. During a normal hot spell, that nighttime cool down is the thing that lets you reset. It's the release valve. But under a pattern like this one, that release valve gets taken away entirely. The nights stay warm, the days keep getting hotter, and the heat just keeps stacking on top of itself with absolutely nowhere to go. That is the real danger of a heat dome. It isn't just one scorching afternoon that you tough out and forget. It's the sheer relentlessness of it. Day after day after day, with no real relief in between, wearing people down until the most vulnerable among us simply can't keep up. Now, while all of that is building on one side of the country, let's turn our attention to the other side, because a very different kind of trouble is getting ready over there. And this is where the storms come into the picture. See, all of that trapped heat does not just sit there politely inside its little dome. Around the edges of it, especially along the northern and western rim, the atmosphere becomes incredibly unstable. You've got this enormous reservoir of hot, soupy, humid air bumping directly up against cooler, drier air that's pushing down out of Canada. And that boundary, that invisible line in the sky where the two air masses collide, becomes a factory, a storm factory. One that is fully capable of cranking out round after round after round of violent thunderstorms and sending them marching across the very same communities over and over again. Let me explain why that repetition matters so much, because this is one of the details that most people completely miss. A single strong thunderstorm is something almost every part of the country can handle just fine. It rolls through, it dumps some rain, maybe it knocks a few branches down, and then it moves on and it's over. That's just an ordinary summer afternoon. But that is not what this particular pattern produces. This pattern lines the storms up like train cars on a track, one right after another, every one of them following the same path over the same ground. Meteorologists actually have a specific name for this. They call it training, because the storms roll over the same stretch of land the way railroad cars roll over the same stretch of track. And when that happens, the danger doesn't just add up, it multiplies, because the same neighborhoods keep getting hammered again and again with no time whatsoever to recover in between. So what does one of these storms actually carry with it when it arrives? Let's break it down piece by piece, because every single part of it matters. First, there's the wind. And I'm not talking about a gusty little breeze that rattles the windows for a minute. I'm talking about straight line winds, strong enough to snap healthy tree limbs clean off, tear the shingles right off a roof, and turn an unsecured trampoline in the backyard into a wrecking ball that smashes through a fence 3 houses down the street. Winds like that can knock the power out for an entire town in a matter of seconds. And once the grid goes down in the middle of a heat dome, you can start to see how these two threats begin to feed off each other. The heat quietly makes the power grid fragile and overworked. The storm comes along and takes it out completely. And suddenly, all the people who were relying on air conditioning just to survive that heat have no air conditioning at all at the worst possible moment. Second, there's the hail. Under a setup this unstable, the updrafts inside these storms, which are the powerful columns of rising air at the very core of the storm, get strong enough to hold chunks of ice suspended high up in the cloud and grow them larger and larger before finally letting them fall. We're talking hail the size of quarters, the size of $50, and in the very worst cases, golf balls are even bigger, falling out of the sky fast enough to crack a windshield, dent a car hood straight down to the metal, and shred a summer garden into ribbons in the span of just a few minutes. It is loud, it is genuinely violent, and it can do thousands of dollars of damage to a single home in one short, ferocious burst that's over almost before you realize what happened. And third, there's the one that everybody thinks about the very moment a severe storm gets mentioned: tornadoes. Now, I want to be really honest and measured with you here, because this is exactly the kind of thing that gets blown wildly out of proportion online, and that kind of fear-mongering genuinely helps no one. So here's the plain truth. Not every storm in this pattern is going to produce a tornado. In fact, most of them won't. But the ingredients, the spin in the atmosphere, the sharp clash of those two air masses, the raw instability sitting over the region, all of those ingredients are going to be present and accounted for. And when the ingredients are all there, sometimes all it takes is for them to line up in just the right way at just the right moment. And a rotating storm can drop a tornado down onto the ground with very little warning at all, the kind of tornado that can take a well-built house right down to its foundation in a matter of seconds. So no, I am absolutely not telling you that a tornado outbreak is guaranteed. What I'm telling you is that the atmosphere is loading the dice, and that is a situation that deserves your respect, not your panic. All right, so we've covered the heat building on one side and the storms firing on the other. Now I want to circle all the way back to that third threat I mentioned at the very beginning, the one hiding quietly behind everything else, because this is the piece that catches the most people completely off guard. And that third threat is water, specifically flooding. And not the kind of flooding that comes from a hurricane you can watch creeping across the map for a full week. I'm talking about the kind that shows up fast, out of what looks like just an ordinary rainy afternoon, and turns a quiet residential street into a moving river before anyone has any time at all to react. Here's exactly why this particular pattern is so dangerous when it comes to flooding. Remember those training storms, the ones lining up and rolling over the same ground again and again? Well, every single one of them dumps its rain in the same place. The first storm soaks the ground until the soil simply cannot absorb one more drop. The second storm arrives and finds nowhere for its water to go, so that water starts to pool up and run off across the surface. By the time the third or the fourth storm comes through, the creeks are already overflowing their banks, the storm drains are completely backed up, and the water is rising fast in places that have never flooded before in living memory. And it can happen shockingly, frighteningly fast. A road that was perfectly dry just an hour ago can be sitting under 2 feet of moving water. And moving water is deceptively, dangerously powerful. It really does not take very much of it at all to pick a car up off the pavement and carry it away like it weighs nothing. And this next part is the piece I really truly need you to hear, because it is the one that actually saves lives. The overwhelming majority of people who get into serious, life-threatening trouble during a flood do it in their vehicle. They come up on water lying across the road, they take one look at it and decide it looks shallow enough, they figure their truck can surely handle it, and they drive right in. And that right there is the fatal mistake, because you cannot tell how deep that water is just by looking at it from the driver's seat. And you cannot tell how fast it's moving, and you have no idea whether the road surface underneath it has already been washed completely away. It takes only about a foot of moving water to float most cars right off the ground. 2 feet of it will carry away almost anything on the road, including big trucks and heavy SUVs. So if you take just one single thing away from this entire forecast, please let it be this one. If you come to a flooded road, you turn around. You do not, under any circumstances, drive through it. There is no destination anywhere on this earth that is worth that risk. Now let me pull all of this together for you, because I know I've thrown an awful lot at you, and the entire point of this is to make it clearer, not to leave you more overwhelmed than when you started. So here's the shape of what's coming, all in one place. On one side of the country, a heat dome building day by day into genuinely dangerous territory, made worse by warm nights that never let anybody truly recover. Then, all around the edges of that dome, a storm factory firing off round after round of severe weather, each storm carrying damaging straight-line wind, large destructive hail, and the real potential for tornadoes. And running quietly underneath all of it, a flooding threat that builds and builds as the same exhausted ground gets soaked again and again. 3 different hazards, all connected to each other, all feeding off the same one enormous pattern that is setting up over the country right now as you're watching this. And I need to be very clear about one thing, because it genuinely matters. I am not standing here telling you that every single one of these threats is going to hit every single place at maximum strength. That is simply not how weather works. And frankly, anybody who claims to know exactly where and exactly when all of this is going to land is not being straight with you. What I am telling you is that the ingredients for something significant are clearly coming together across a very large part of the country. And when the ingredients are this loaded, the genuinely smart move is to pay attention and get ready. Not to spiral into panic and not to shrug it off and ignore it either. Just calm, clear-eyed preparation. That's the whole thing. So let's talk about what being ready actually looks like in real life, because none of this information does you a bit of good if it just leaves you sitting there feeling anxious. And here's the genuinely good news. The steps that protect you are simple, and almost all of them cost nothing at all. Let's start with the heat. If you happen to be in the zone where that dome is building, the single most important thing is to have a real plan for staying cool. If your home has air conditioning, make sure it is actually working right now, today, before the worst of it arrives, because the middle of a brutal heat wave is the single hardest time on Earth to get anything repaired. And if you don't have air conditioning at home, then know exactly where you can go. A public library, a shopping mall, a friend or family member's house, a designated cooling center that your town has set up, and drink water before you actually feel thirsty, because by the time you feel real thirst in heat like this, your body is already falling behind. And please, this is the one that I ask about every single time because it matters more than almost anything else. Check on the people around you who genuinely cannot check on themselves, the elderly neighbor who lives all alone, the person down the street dealing with serious health problems. A 5-minute knock on a door can honestly be the entire difference between somebody being perfectly fine and somebody ending up in real life-threatening trouble. Heat is quiet and it is patient, and it specifically targets the people who are least able to fight back against it. A little bit of looking out for one another goes an incredibly long way during a stretch like this. Now, for the storms. The single most important tool you have is warning. And warning only actually works if you can genuinely receive it in time. So make absolutely sure you have some way to get alerts even if the power goes out, and even if you happen to be sound asleep. Turn on the emergency alerts on your phone right now if they aren't already on. And if you live in an area that regularly sees a lot of severe weather, a small, cheap, battery-powered weather radio is worth every single penny you'll spend on it, because it will physically wake you up in the dead of night the very moment a warning gets issued for your exact location. And that handful of minutes of advance warning is sometimes the only thing standing between you and disaster. It's enough time to get everyone to a safe part of the house before the very worst of it arrives at your door. And take 10 minutes today, right now, while nothing at all is happening, to just walk around the outside of your property. Look at that trampoline, the patio umbrella, the empty planters, the trash cans, the lawn chairs, anything at all light enough for a strong wind to pick up and hurl through the air. Decide right now where you'd move all of those things if a warning came in. And know where the safest room in your home is, the one on the lowest floor toward the middle of the house, away from all the windows. You genuinely do not need to live in fear of any of this. You just need to know the plan ahead of time so that if the moment ever does come, you are not standing there trying to figure it all out for the very first time while the wind is already screaming outside your walls. And for the flooding, well, we already covered the single most important rule, but it is so important that it's worth saying one more time because it is the one that matters most of all. Turn around, don't drown. If you see water lying across a road, you find another way around. It really, truly is that simple, and it really, truly does save lives over and over again every single year. Look, I know a forecast like this one can feel heavy. A massive pattern, a whole lot of moving parts, threats coming at you from 3 completely different directions all at the same time. But here's what I genuinely want you to walk away with today. Weather like this has come before, many times over, and people have gotten through it before every single time. And the ones who came through it the best were almost always the very same people who saw it coming and quietly took a few simple steps to get themselves ready. That's it. That is the entire game. Not fear, not panic, just paying attention and being prepared. And the truth is, that is exactly what you are doing right now, in this very moment, by watching this all the way through to the end. You are already miles ahead of most people out there. So if this helped you make some sense of what's building out there, if it took a genuinely confusing situation and made it even a little bit clearer for you, then do me a quick favor and hit that like button, because it honestly does help more people find this video when they're out there searching for real answers instead of empty hype. Subscribe if you haven't already, and go ahead and turn on those notifications so that when this whole pattern comes into sharper focus over the next few days, you will be among the very first to know exactly what has changed and what it means for you. And before you head out, I really do want to hear from you on this one. Out of absolutely everything we talked through today, the building heat, the severe storms, or that sneaky flooding threat hiding underneath it all, which one are you the most concerned about where you actually live, and why? Drop it down in the comments for me. I read through every single one of them, and it is always genuinely fascinating to see just how different the answers are depending on where people are and what they have already lived through in their own lives. Stay safe out there. Take good care of each other, and I will see you in the next one.